1 Shemuel chapter 22. And David went from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam, and his brothers and all his father's house heard it and went down to him there. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone bitter in being gathered to him. So he became head over them, and there were about 400 men with him. And David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and said to the sovereign of Moab, Please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what Elohim does for me. And he left them with the sovereign of Moab, and they dwelled with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. And the prophet Gad said to David, Do not remain in the stronghold, leave and go to the land of Yehudah. So David left and went into the Hereth woods. And Shemuel heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered while Shemuel was in Gibeah, sitting under a tamarisk tree in Ramah, with his spear in his hand, and all his servants standing about him. And Shemuel said to his servants who were standing around him, Hear now, you Benjamites, does the son of Ishai give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? For all of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Ishai. And there is not one of you who is grieved for me or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me, to lie in wait as it is this day. And Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Shemuel, answered and said, I saw the son of Ishai going to Nob, to Ahimelech son of Ahitub, and he inquired of Yahuwah for him, gave him food, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. And the sovereign sent someone to call Ahimelech the priest, son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were in Nob, and they all came to the sovereign. And Shemuel said, Hear now, son of Ahitub. And he answered, Here I am, my master. And Shemuel said to him, Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Ishai, by giving him bread and a sword, and have inquired of Elohim for him to rise against me, to lie in wait as it is this day? And Ahimelech answered the sovereign and said, And who among all your servants is so trustworthy as David, who is the sovereign's son-in-law, and has turned aside to your counsel, and is esteemed in your house? Have I today begun to inquire of Elohim for him? Far be it from me. Let not the sovereign lay a case against his servant, or against any in the house of my father. For your servant knew not of all this, little or much. And the sovereign said, You shall certainly die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. The sovereign then said to the guards who stood about him, Turn and put the priests of Yahuwah to death, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not reveal it to me. But the servants of the sovereign would not lift their hands to come against the priests of Yahuwah. And the sovereign said to Doeg, You turn and come against the priests. So Doeg the Edomite turned and came against the priests, and put to death on that day 85 men who wore a linen shoulder garment. And he smote Nob, the city of the priests, with the edge of the sword, from men even to women, from children even to nursing infants, and oxen and donkeys and sheep, with the edge of the sword. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Ebiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Ebiathar reported to David that Shemuel had slain the priests of Yahuwah. And David said to Ebiathar, I knew that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would certainly inform Shemuel. I am accountable for all the lives of your father's house. Remain with me, do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, but with me you are safe. 1 Shemuel chapter 23. And they informed David, saying, See, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are plundering the threshing floors. So David inquired of Yahuwah, saying, Shall I go and smite these Philistines? And Yahuwah said to David, Go and smite the Philistines and save Keilah. And David's men said to him, See, we here in Yehudah are afraid. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? And David inquired of Yahuwah once again. And Yahuwah answered him and said, Arise, go down to Keilah, for I am giving the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines. And he led away their livestock and smote them a great smiting. Thus David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. And it came to be, when Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, that he went down with a shoulder garment in his hand. And Shemuel was informed that David had gone to Keilah. Then Shemuel said, Elohim has esteemed him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. And Shemuel summoned all the people to battle to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. And David knew that Shemuel was plotting evil against him, and said to Abiathar the priest, Bring the shoulder garment here. And David said, O Yahuwah Elohim of Israel, your servant has heard for certain that Shemuel seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city for my sake. Are the landowners of Keilah going to surrender me into his hand? Is Shemuel coming down as your servant has heard? O Yahuwah Elohim of Israel, I pray, let your servant know. And Yahuwah said, He is coming down. And David said, Are the landowners of Keilah going to surrender me and my men into the hand of Shemuel? And Yahuwah said, They are going to surrender you. Then David and his men, about 600, arose and left Keilah and went wherever they could go. And Shemuel was informed that David had escaped from Keilah, and he ceased to go out. And David remained in the wilderness in strongholds, and remained in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. And Shemuel sought him every day, but Elohim did not give him into his hand. And David saw that Shemuel had come out to seek his life, while David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. And Jonathan, Shemuel's son, arose and went to David at Horesh, and strengthened his hand in Elohim, and said to him, Do not fear, for the hand of Shemuel my father is not going to find you, and you are to reign over Israel, and I am to be next to you. Even my father Shemuel knows that. And they made a covenant before Yahuwah, and David remained at Horesh while Jonathan went to his own house. And the Ziphites came up to Shemuel at Gibeah, saying, Is David not hiding with us in strongholds, Horesh in the hill of Keilah, which is on the south of the wasteland? And now, O sovereign, by all the desire of your being, come down, and our heart is to surrender him into the sovereign's hand. And Shemuel said, Blessed are you of Yahuwah, for you have sympathy with me. Please go, prepare yet further, and find out and see the place where his hideout is, who has seen him there, for I am told that he is very cunning. So look and learn all about the hiding places where he hides, and you shall come back to me with certainty. Then I shall go with you, and it shall be, if he is in the land, that I shall search for him throughout all the clans of Yehudah. And they rose up and went to Ziph before Shemuel, while David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the desert plain on the south of the wasteland. And Shemuel and his men went to seek him, and they informed David. So he went down to the rock and remained in the wilderness of Maon. And when Shemuel heard this, he pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. And Shemuel went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. And David was hurrying to get away from Shemuel, for Shemuel and his men were surrounding David and his men to take them. Then a messenger came to Shemuel, saying, Hurry and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. So Shemuel turned back from pursuing David. They went against the Philistines. Therefore they called that place Selah Hamath Lachoth. And David went up from there and remained in strongholds at En-gedi. 1 Shemuel chapter 24. And it came to be when Shemuel had returned from pursuing the Philistines that it was reported to him, saying, See, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. So Shemuel took 300 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepfolds on the way, and there was a cave, and Shemuel went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said to him, See, the day of watch Yahuwah said to you, See, I am giving your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you. And David arose and gently cut off a corner of Shemuel's robe. And it came to be afterward that the heart of David smote him, because he had cut the robe of Shemuel. So he said to his men, Far be it from me, by Yahuwah, that I should do this matter to my master, anointed of Yahuwah, to stretch out my hand against him, for he is the anointed of Yahuwah. And David dispersed his servants with words, and did not allow them to rise against Shemuel. And Shemuel rose up from the cave and went on his way. And afterward David arose and went out of the cave, and called out to Shemuel, saying, My master the sovereign. And when Shemuel looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and did obedience. And David said to Shemuel, Why do you listen to the words of men who say, See, David seeks to do you evil? See, this day your eyes have seen that Yahuwah gave you today into my hand in the cave, and one said to slay you, but my eye pardoned you. And I said, I do not stretch out my hand against my master, for he is the anointed of Yahuwah. And my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not slay you. Know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand, and I have not sinned against you while you are hunting my life to take it. Let Yahuwah judge between you and me, and let Yahuwah revenge me on you, but my hand is not against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, wrong comes from the wrongdoer, but my hand is not against you. After whom has the sovereign of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog, a flea? And Yahuwah shall be judge, and rightly rule between you and me, and see, and plead my case, and rightly rule me out of your hand. And it came to be, when David had ended speaking these words to Shemuel, that Shemuel said, Is this your voice, my son David? So Shemuel lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, You are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded me with good, whereas I have rewarded you with evil. And you have shown today how you have done good to me, for when Yahuwah surrendered me into your hand, you did not slay me. For if a man finds his enemy, shall he let him get away safely, and let Yahuwah reward you with good for what you have done to me today? And now look, I know that you shall certainly reign, and that the reign of Israel shall be established in your hand. And now swear to me by Yahuwah that you do not cut off my seed after me, nor destroy my name from my father's house. And David swore to Shemuel. Then Shemuel went home, and David and his men went up to the stronghold. 1 Shemuel chapter 25. And Shemuel died, and all Israel gathered and mourned for him, and buried him at his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down into the wilderness of Paran. Now there was a man in Maon, and his work was in Carmel, and the man was very great. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And he came to be shearing his sheep in Carmel. And the name of the man was Nobal, and the name of his wife Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and good looking. But the man was hard and evil in his doings, and he was of Caleb. And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. And David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, Go up to Carmel, and you shall come to Nabal, and greet him in my name, and say this, Long life and peace to you, and peace to your house, and peace to all that you have. And now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us. We did not put them to shame, and not a speck of theirs was missing all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and let them inform you. So let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a good day. Please give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and to your son David. And the young men of David came and spoke to Nabal according to all these words in the name of David, and waited. But Nabal answered the servants of David and said, Who is David? And who is the son of Ishai? The servants who are running away from their masters have become many nowadays. And shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? And the young men of David turned around on their way and went back, and came and reported to him all these words. And David said to his men, Each one gird on his sword. So they each girded on his sword. And David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men went with David, and 200 remained with the baggage. And one of the young men informed Abigail, the wife of Nabal, saying, See, David hath sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, but he scoffed at them. But the men were very good to us, and did not put us to shame, nor did we miss any item all the days we accompanied them when we were in the fields. They were a wall to us both by night and day, all the days we were with them tending the sheep. And now know and see what you should do, for evil has been resolved against our master and against all his household, and he is too much of a son of Belial to speak to. Then Abigail made haste, and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine, and 5 sheep made ready, 5 measures of roasted grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. And she said to her servants, Pass over before me. See, I am coming after you. But she did not inform her husband Nabal. And it came to be as she rode on the donkey that she went down on the cover of the hill, and there were David and his men coming down toward her, and she met them. And David had said, Only in vain have I protected all that this one has in the wilderness, so that not a speck was missing of all that belongs to him, and he has repaid me evil for good. Let Elohim do so, and more also to the enemies of David, if I leave one male of all who belong to him by morning light. And Abigail saw David, and she hastened to come down from the donkeys, and fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground, and fell at his feet, and said, On me, my master, let the crookedness be on me, and please let your female servant speak in your ears, and hear the words of your female servant. Please let not my master regard this man of Belial Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your female servant, did not see the young men of my master whom you sent. And now my master, as Yahuwah lives, and as your being lives, since Yahuwah has withheld you from coming to bloodshed, and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now then, let your enemies be as Nabal, even those seeking evil against my master. And now this present which your female servant has brought to my master, let it be given to the young men who follow my master. Please forgive the transgression of your female servant, for Yahuwah is certainly making a steadfast house for my master, because my master fights the battles of Yahuwah, and evil is not found in you in all your days. And if a man rises to pursue you and seek your life, and the life of my master has been bound in the bundle of the living with Yahuwah, your Elohim, then the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the pocket of a sling. And it shall be when Yahuwah has done for my master according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you ruler over Israel. Do not let this be a staggering and stumbling of heart to my master, that you have shed blood without cause, or that my master has saved himself. And when Yahuwah has done good to my master, then remember your female servant. And David said to Abigail, Blessed be Yahuwah Elohim of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. And blessed is your good taste, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand. Nevertheless, as Yahuwah Elohim of Israel lives, who has kept me back from doing evil to you, if you had not hurried and come to meet me, not a male would have been left to Nabal by break of day for certain. And David received from her hand what she had brought him, and said to her, Go up in peace to your house. See, I have listened to your voice, and have accepted your face. And Abigail went to Nabal, and see, he was at a feast in his house, like the feast of a sovereign. And Nabal's heart was glad within him, and he was exceedingly drunk. So she told him not a word, little or much, until morning light. And it came to be in the morning, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife had told him these matters, that his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. And it came to be in about 10 days that Yahuwah smote Nabal, and he died. And David heard that Nabal was dead, and he said, Blessed be Yahuwah, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept his servant from evil. For Yahuwah has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head. And David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. And when the servants of David had come to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, David sent us to you to ask you to become his wife. And she arose, bowed her face to the earth, and said, Here is your female servant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my master. And Abigail hurried and rose, and rode on a donkey with 5 of her female attendants. And she followed the messengers of David, and became his wife. David had also taken Abinoam of Yisrael, and so both of them were his wives. But Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, son of Lash, who was from Galilee. 1 Samuel, Shemuel chapter 26. And the Ziphites came to Shemuel at Gibeah, saying, Is not David hiding himself in the hill of Hachilah, overlooking the wasteland? And Shemuel rose up and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, and with him 3,000 chosen men of Israel, to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Shemuel encamped in the hill of the Hachilah, overlooking the wasteland by the way, while David was dwelling in the wilderness. And he saw that Shemuel came after him into the wilderness. And David sent out spies, and learned that Shemuel had indeed come. And David rose up and came to the place where Shemuel had encamped. And David saw the place where Shemuel lay, and Abner son of Ner, the commander of his army. And Shemuel was lying within the enclosure, with the people encamped all around him. And David spoke up and said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Abishai son of Zeruiah, brother of Joab, saying, Who does go down with me to Shemuel in the camp? And Abishai said, I go down with you. And David and Abishai came to the people by night, and saw Shemuel lying asleep within the camp, with his spear stuck in the ground by his head. And Abner and the people lay all around him. And Abishai said to David, Elohim has surrendered your enemy into your hand this day. And now, please let me smite him at once with the spear, right into the earth, and not a second time. But David said to Abishai, Do not destroy him, for who shall stretch out his hand against the anointed of Yahuwah, and be guiltless? David also said, As Yahuwah lives, except Yahuwah does smite him, or his day come that he shall die, or he shall go out to battle and perish. Far be it from me, by Yahuwah, that I stretch out my hand against the anointed of Yahuwah. And now, please take the spear and the jug of water that are by his head, and let us go. So David took the spear and the jug of water by Shemuel's head, and they went away, and no man saw it or knew it or awoke, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from Yahuwah had fallen on them. And David passed over to the other side and stood on the top of a hill far away, a great distance being between them. And David called out to the people and to Abner, son of Ner, saying, Do you not answer Abner? And Abner answered and said, Who are you calling out to the sovereign? And David said to Abner, Are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not guarded your master the sovereign? For one of the people came in to destroy your master the sovereign. What you have done is not good. As Yahuwah lives, you are worthy to die, because you have not guarded your master, the anointed of Yahuwah. And now see where the sovereign's spear is, and the jug of water that was by his head. And Shemuel recognized David's voice and said, Is that your voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, my master, O sovereign. And he said, Why is this that my master is pursuing his servant? For what have I done? Or what evil is in my hand? And now please let my master the sovereign hear the words of his servant. If Yahuwah has moved you against me, let him accept an offering. But if it is the children of men, then they are cursed before Yahuwah. For they have driven me out today, that I should not join myself to the inheritance of Yahuwah, saying, Go, serve other mighty ones. And now, do not let my blood fall to the earth before the face of Yahuwah. For the sovereign of Israel has come out to seek a flea, as when one hunts a partridge in the mountains. And Shemuel said, I have sinned. Come back, my son David, for no more am I going to do evil to you, because my life was precious in your eyes today. See, I have acted foolishly, and have greatly strayed. And David answered and said, See the sovereign's spear, and let one of the young men come over and get it. And let Yahuwah reward every man for his righteousness and his trustworthiness. For this day Yahuwah gave you into my hand, but I would not stretch out my hand against the anointed of Yahuwah. And see, as your life has been valued in my eyes today, so let my life be valued in the eyes of Yahuwah, and let him deliver me out of all distress. And Shemuel said to David, Blessed are you, my son David, achieving much, and indeed prevailing. Then David went on his way, and Shemuel returned to his place. 1 Samuel, Shemuel, chapter 27. And David said in his heart, Now I shall perish by the hand of Saul some day. There is naught better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul shall give up searching for me any longer in any part of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. So David rose up and passed over with the 600 men who were with him to Achish, son of Maach, sovereign of Gath. And David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each one with his household. David with his 2 wives, Abinoam, the Israelitess, and Abigail, the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. And it was reported to Shemuel that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. And David said to Achish, If I have now found favor in your eyes, let them give me a peace in some town in the country to dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? And Achish gave him Ziklag that day. That is why Ziklag has belonged to the sovereigns of Yehudah to this day. And the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines came to be 1 year and 4 months. And David and his men went up and raided the Gezerites and the Gerzites and the Amalekites, for those nations were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as you go to Shur, even as far as the land of Mizraim. And when David had smitten the land, he left neither man nor woman alive, but took away sheep and cattle, and donkeys and camels and garments, and returned and came to Achish. And Achish would say, Where have you made a raid today? And David would say, Against the south of Yehudah, or against the south of the Yerahmeelites, or against the south of the Kenites. David did not keep alive man nor woman to bring news to God, saying, Lest any inform against us, saying, Thus David did. And this was his practice all the days that he dwelt in the country of the Philistines. And Achish trusted David, saying to himself, He has indeed made himself a stench to his people in Israel, and has become a servant forever. First Samuel, Shemuel, chapter 28. And it came to be in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies for battle to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, You know, of course, that you are to go out with me in the army, you and your men. And David said to Achish, Very well, you shall know what your servant should do. And Achish said to David, Very well, I make you one of my chief guardians forever. And Shemuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah in his own city. And Saul had put away the Medians and the Spiritists from the land. And the Philistines were gathered, and came and encamped at Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. And when Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And Saul inquired of Yahuwah, but Yahuwah did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by the prophets. Saul then said to his servants, Find me a woman who is a medium, to go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, Look, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, Please divine for me, and bring up for me the one I shall name. But the woman said to him, Look, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the spiritists from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to put me to death? And Saul swore to her by Yahuwah, saying, As Yahuwah lives, no punishment comes upon you for this matter. And the woman said, Whom do I bring up for you? So he said, Bring up Shemuel for me. And when the woman saw Shemuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, Why have you deceived me? You yourself are Saul. And the sovereign said to her, Do not be afraid. What did you see? And the woman said to Saul, I saw a spirit coming up out of the earth. And he said to her, What is his form? And she said, An old man is coming up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul knew that it was Shemuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did obedience. And Shemuel said to Saul, Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I am deeply distressed, for the Philistines are fighting against me, and Elohim has turned aside from me, and does not answer me any more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. So I have called you to reveal to me what I should do. Then Shemuel said, And why do you ask me, seeing Yahuwah has turned aside from you and has become your enemy? And Yahuwah has done for himself as he spoke by me. For Yahuwah has torn the rein out of your hand and given it to your neighbor, to David, because you did not obey the voice of Yahuwah, nor execute his burning wrath upon Amalek. Therefore Yahuwah has done this matter to you today. Further, Yahuwah also gives Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons are with me. Yahuwah also gives the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. And immediately Saul fell on the ground, his complete length, and greatly feared because of the words of Shemuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no food all day or all night. And the woman came to Shemuel and saw that he had been greatly disturbed, and said to him, See, your female servant has obeyed your voice, and I have put my life in my hands, and has listened to the words which you spoke to me. And now please listen to the voice of your female servant too, and let me set a piece of bread before you, and eat, so that you have strength when you go on your way. But he refused and said, I am not going to eat. But his servants together with the woman urged him, and he listened to their voice. So he rose from the ground and sat on the bed. And the woman had a fatted calf in the house, and she quickly slaughtered it. And she took flour and kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread from it. And she brought it before Shemuel and his servants. And they ate and rose up and went away that night. 1 Samuel, Shemuel, chapter 29. And the Philistines gathered all their armies at Aphek, while Israel encamped by a fountain which is in Yisrael. And the princes of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish. And the princes of the Philistines said, Who are these Hebrews? And Achish said to the princes of the Philistines, Is this not David, the servant of Shemuel, sovereign of Israel, who has been with me these days or these years? And to this day I have found no evil in him since he came over. But the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him, and the princes of the Philistines said to him, Send the man back. Let him return to the place which you have appointed for him, and do not let him go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become our adversary. For with what could he appease his master, if not with the heads of these men? Is this not David, of whom they sang to each other and danced, and saying, Shemuel smote his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And Achish called David and said to him, As Yahuwah lives, you have been straight, and your going out and your coming in with me in the army is good in my eyes. For to this day I have not found evil in you since the day of your coming to me. But in the eyes of the princes you are not good. And now return and go in peace, and do no evil in the eyes of the princes of the Philistines. And David said to Achish, But what have I done? And to this day, what have you found in your servant as long as I have been with you, that I should not go and fight against the enemies of my master the sovereign? But Achish answered and said to David, I know that you are as good in my eyes as a messenger of Elohim. But the princes of the Philistines have said, Let him not go up with us to the battle. And now rise early in the morning with your master's servants who have come with you. And as soon as you are up early in the morning and have light, then go. And David and his men rose up early to go in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Yisrael. 1 Samuel, Shemuel, chapter 30. And it came to be when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag, and smote Ziklag, and burned it with fire. And they took captive the women and those who were there, from small to great. They did not kill anyone, but they led them away and went their way. And David and his men came to the city and saw it burn with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive. And David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives, Ahinoam the Yisraelitess, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite, had been taken captive. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because the being of all the people were grieved, each for his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened himself in Yahuwah his Elohim. And David said to Abiathar the priest, son of Ahimelech, please bring the shoulder garment here to me. So Abiathar brought the shoulder garment to David. And David inquired of Yahuwah, saying, Do I pursue this band? Do I overtake them? And he answered him, Pursue, for you shall certainly overtake them, and certainly rescue. So David went, he and the 600 men who were with him, and came to the Wadi Bezor, where a halt was made by those who were left behind. While David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 halted, who were too faint to pass over the Wadi Bezor. And they found a man in the field, a Mizraite, and took him to David. And they gave him bread, and he ate, and they let him drink water, and gave him a piece of a cake of figs, and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his strength came back to him, for he had not eaten bread nor drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, To whom do you belong, and where are you from? And he said, I am a young man from Mizraim, servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind, for I had been sick 3 days. We attacked the south of the Kirites, and against that which belongs to Yehuda, and upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said to him, Could you bring me down to this marauding band? And he said, Swear to me by Elohim that you neither kill me nor surrender me into the hands of my master. Then I bring you down to this marauding band. And he brought him down, and saw they were spread out over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil which they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Yehuda. And David smote them from twilight until the evening of the next day, and none of them escaped, except 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. And David rescued all that the Amalekites had taken. David also rescued his 2 wives, and there was none missing to them, whether small or great, whether sons or daughters, or spoil, or whatever they had taken from them. David recovered all. Besides, David captured all the flocks and herds they had driven before those livestock. And they said, This is David's spoil. And David came to the 200 men who were too faint to follow David, who had also been left at the Wadi Bezor. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near the people, he greeted them. And all the evil and worthless men of those who went with David answered and said, Because they did not go with us, we do not give them any of the spoil that we have rescued, except for every man's wife and children, and let them take them and go. But David said, My brothers, do not do so with what Yahuwah has given us, who has protected us and gave into our hand the band that came against us. And who would listen to you in this matter? For as his portion is who goes down to the battle, so is his portion who remains with the baggage. They share alike. And it came to be from that day forward, he appointed it for a law and a right ruling for Israel to this day. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Yehuda, to his friends, saying, Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of Yahuwah. To those in Bethel, and to those in Ramoth of the south, and to those in Yattah, and to those in Aurora, and to those in Sibmath, and to those in Estemoa, and to those in Rakah, and to those in the cities of the Yerahmeelites, and to those in the cities of the Kenites, and to those in Hormah, and to those in Korashan, and to those in Ethak, and to those in Hebron, and to all the places where David had gone up and down, he and his men. First Samuel, Shemuel chapter 31. And the Philistines were fighting against Israel. And the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard after Shemuel and his sons. And the Philistines smote Jonathan and Abinadab and Melchishua, sons of Shemuel. And the battle went hard against Shemuel, and the archers hit him so that he was severely wounded by the archers. And Shemuel said to his armor-bearer, Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and roll themselves on me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. So Shemuel took the sword and fell on it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Shemuel was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. Thus Shemuel died, and 3 of his sons, and his armor-bearer, also all his men together on that day. And they saw the men of Israel who were beyond the valley, and those who were beyond the Jordan, that the men of Israel had fled, and that Shemuel and his sons were dead. So they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. And the next day it came to be, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Shemuel and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to announce it in the house of their idols and to the people. And they placed his armor in the house of the Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. And the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Shemuel. And all the brave men arose and went all night and took the body of Shemuel and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan. And they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree of Jabesh, and fasted for 7 days.